5:34, our board retreat, we've got a few agenda items for the 2018-19 school year, and begin creating goals for this coming year that starts. To facilitate some of that goal setting activity, we have all these little charts that are impossible to read. Just saying, but
Just looking at the colors right now. That's
yeah,
right.
and we had a list in the board materials too, and then I think it's hard to do those things in isolation, and so and then we want to make sure to have a conversation on Pearl and next steps there. I'm not going to pretend that we're going to finalize a set of goals for the 1920 school year tonight, because we're just getting a sense of everything that the district is currently working on. I think having that view is important, and then we just need to start making sure that we maybe tonight we can talk about what a process would be to getting down to winnowing down to our goals for the year, but and then maybe some short-term things that we need to tackle first. We also have an election coming up in November, and so that's a funding time frame to be, potentially board members, right? To come into this process. So anyway, let's start with the review of our goals for this last year. We had an update, Kim, thanks for the hard copy, from a conversation in February, and that's the comment, the column in the far right. And again, it's kind of reflective of some of the themes that we were just discussing. I think perhaps, the board has an area of academic achievement focus. We continued around, we did continue around this year. We had a preschool committee that met though, and we had the updates from that committee. It's kind of on hold, I think, because of some of the F&P-ish type considerations, right? Facilities or how they, and we sort of stalled since that PK group made their presentation. And so we've got the data, we've got some information, and what we can try to go forward, where that fits into our priority scheme. And so, very appreciative of the preschool committee's work. Well, we saw some data from an elementary perspective from RAM last work session, and that was really helpful, and that starts giving us a feel for efficacy. One of the things that came out in my mind, though, hearing the conversations, that it's still really hard to pinpoint, what's actually moving the needle. I mean, class size obviously is helpful. But I just picked up there were so many of the things going on.
There are a lot of variables.
There's a lot of variables, and it's hard to really say this is the lever that's making the big thing. So academic achievement honestly is and preparing students for life is why we're here. So but we are making some progress there. Do people want to make any comments on that one?
Well, and just one thought that I have, and Steve brought it up clearly, there's a lot of variables. And one of the variables has been kind of a changing test,
From the
from
state?
year.
Yeah.
And along with what is expected of a graduate, what is wrong with us having what is expected of a first grader, what is expected of a second, third, fourth, and nothing stops us from having a 50-question test that we give every kid every year, and we can track it ourselves. I was at a sale on Sunday, and I got a 1929 8th grade arithmetic book with problems in it. And every single one of them in there would be relevant to an 8th grader today. And nothing stops us from printing off our own test, having them take it, because we want kids that can do long division, we want kids that can do multiplication, we want them to do story problems, we want them to figure percentage. There were questions in there about more. I was looking at them saying our discussions about life skills, it's right there. They had questions in there about mortgage, banknotes, why it's not good to take short-term interest on a short-term loan. And I think that, sometimes we use that testing as an excuse. Well, shoot, let's make our own, let's have that consistency, and give it to kids for 5 years and see how it does. Just a thought.
Thanks. Any other comments on the academic achievement goal for this year. How about equity? Just some things we noted in February, there was information around increasing administrative code by 38%. I don't know that we ever saw the teacher data, did we?
I thought Chase presented that in March, didn't he?
Chase did a presentation.
I want to say it was in March.
Okay, so that's what
Yeah.
that was, okay.
But did you have actual?
Teacher data, it was sort of initiatives around
Yeah.
how it increased,
I thought he had the
or, you know,
data,
all those
too.
things. I don't,
thought he
I don't,
I
I
think he had said it was coming, but.
I know we had.
Albert was there.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's all right.
Maybe that's it.
Okay.
We could meet the bar.
He'll be here in 10 minutes.
Yeah, and this is something we're gonna need to continue to talk about as a goal for our board, is this, you know, how do we begin to move the needle there? So we did get that HR, I do remember Chase's presentation, I just didn't remember seeing the teacher data for whatever reason. Improving PD experiences, I think there's some activity around that in terms of shifting from the 1 hour on Thursday to a day PD model.
Yeah, I think we'd had a conversation with you guys about the hour PD model, and then if we could move towards some half days or some full days,
Yeah.
full day opportunities. And
So that's
we
part
talked
of
some this morning about engaging the association
that's-
and some of that.
our next steps with that. We meet with the association on Monday, and we talk to them, because I think our meeting, when we're right in here, I want to say it was in May that we had that conversation.
Wasn't that long ago.
No, I think it was right at the end of the school year, and so we shared that with the association. They were about to leave for summer break and asked if we could re-engage in that conversation. They're gonna wanna have some conversation with their members about it and get feedback from them about their perceptions about how what they think are the best opportunities for staff in terms of meeting their needs of both depth, but also continuity over the course of the year. So those are some of the things Brady shared
And this
at our
is
last
when
meeting.
we're gonna have to get community engagement.
Yep.
I mean, we shift to half a full day and.
Our thought was to get the staff members' input, bring that back to you, and then once you have that, you'll be able to take a look at that, then hopefully we wind up with a proposal that we can take out and vet with the community and get feedback from them, as opposed to going out without having the staff input and then either having to backtrack or shift course once we get that staff
Yeah.
input. So we're gonna try to get that right away.
Okay.
I see no reason why that would not be a goal for the next year, and you can couch it with
Yep.
improving the efficacy of PD,
Right.
Yeah,
without saying
Mhm.
explicitly if we're gonna do
yeah, I
a full
think
day
that's
or half day,
good.
but I think it needs to be in there as a tangible thing that we're gonna try and get to, so that we can then put it in place, whether it's next year, year after, 2 years after,
Sure.
whatever it is. Because I know when it was even brought up before, parents at least started talking about it, well, when did that
Oh,
happen?
yeah, yeah.
How much
Would it
lead
be
time
one
do we
day? Would it
need?
be half-
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it started rolling, and I think the general statement is agreement that, you know, longer time together would be a good thing, right?
And
And so I think we need to figure out how to make that happen in a way that works for everybody. But I definitely think that should be a goal, that we put a timeline on, that we're gonna at least have a plan by the end of the year.
yeah, so design that PD experience, whatever it is, and then.
Well, and I think having some
Next
draft
vision plan.
calendars for future years, because I think that's what we heard at DPO that day was, okay, if you're gonna change it, I'm not opposed to having it changed, but I need to know what it looks like, because it's gonna have some
Time to
significant
prepare,
ramifications on my family. How will I plan for that? So I think building out a couple of sample calendars that work out 2-3 years in advance, so people can start looking at it and saying, what does it look like? How will that feel?
And then obviously we did the boundary stuff, which was great. And then the equity committee has done a lot of work, and we recently just had a presentation.
Well, it wasn't the equity committee, but I mean, they were a part of it,
But it was, what was? the-
Partnership.
The development group.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
But, so we did see that presentation very recently, I mean, I haven't actually.
And it's really coming together. We are working internally as we look at what are our critical areas of focus, what are the action steps we need to make those happen, who's responsible for those, how do we measure them. So we've got ongoing dialogue with Sarah, who's been in to present to you, to get that fine-tuned, and we're maybe a month out.
Yeah, I think in 3 to 4 weeks we'll
Yeah.
have a plan ready to
Yeah, based on
present,
the
so,
last draft. we're
yeah.
About a month out from having that ready to roll.
What else do we need to talk about from the equity work that we did this year? I think it's a big theme.
Yeah,
Anything else?
Well, I would just, I mean, it's not highlighted on there, I think the continue to promote the use of MTSS and PBIS, I know that when I tried to decipher some of these colored boxes, I think that was something that a fair number of people put as an emphasis, and doing it with fidelity across, every school and everything, so I think it's a good one to, definitely keep on there. I don't know whether there's any interest in getting rid of it.
And we heard a lot about it last week at the mental health discussion too,
Right.
right? We were talking about the various supports that we have in schools there, and that was a big thing, right? So yeah, that one almost fits, it's almost a category of its own. It fits in lots of different categories, right? So it's
Academic and behavior and social emotional.
Yeah.
That's really like the core focus, right? The rest of the things should feed into that somehow. So that MTSS piece is really what has to stay the center of our focus, and then all those other things are kind of nice to do things in there to complement and make sure it's accentuated. But we start with the core and that MTSS, and so that's what we spend a lot of time talking to the group about, is where does it fit in that MTSS model.
Okay.
How is it tiered?
Yeah.
How are you doing the universal instruction? That's,
I know, and we chatted, but yeah, I think it'd be helpful for me, and maybe you too, is to have a graphic. So let's say mental health from the other night. So to take that document and put it in a graphic that's really easy to see, what are those tier 1 supports? So it's just, so we can just go out and say, here's the link to the graphic that shows you, here's what everybody gets. And so that everybody understands also that it's not you get this or this or this, it's you layer on top and you get to that triangle. So we can at least have some, and maybe even within there, some examples. At City High, we are doing X, that, how that flows through the tier, so people can really understand.
have you seen the Tate model that they put together? Tate's got a big
Yeah, Tate's got
poster.
one. Yeah, because we
and
have that
yeah.
2 years ago, I think.
Ann and I talked about that, and I talked to Laura about maybe not exactly like that, but is there something that you can do like that, maybe a few less words, to help people understand both sides of the triangle, where interventions fit in, which ones are tiered similarly, because I think a lot of people don't understand, is that a tier 2 intervention, a tier 1 intervention, and if they don't know the details of it, it's hard to figure out how that fits together.
And that's exactly the work that the secondary folks are landing on right now. Our teaching and learning directors have a heavy focus with the secondary team and garnering that information from all 7 of the buildings. I don't want to steal Matt's thunder, but just to see what they think they have in the way of tier 2 and tier 3 supports, both on the academic side and social emotional behavior.
Yeah, we've kind of talked about what would the ideal look for be, so if the district's, position is to be able to support the buildings and be able to roll those out in a robust fashion, then from a district, we need to be able to say, this is what we'd like it to look like, right? Here's what a high-performing system or building would look like, and then have some conversation around where they think they're at, where we see some things being, and then how do we grow to get to that. And so that's some of the work we did over the summer, is trying to get to a place where it'd either be in a graphic or at least a model type standpoint that you'd break down the different areas and say, okay, where are you at on this continuum and how do we grow? And it, Amy's talked a lot about the ESSA plan, and it does mirror somewhat after that too, in that improvement process that schools that have been either identified as targeted or intensive have to go through. So we're trying to make the two kind of work together in that sense.
So help me understand, I guess you're going through the process of seeing where schools are in that implementation path. I'm sure some are barely started and some are more mature. So this kind of gets back to, we're going to do this, and how are schools responding? Are they resisting?
Well, candidly, at the high school level, there was a lot of pushback, and part of it was perception of implementation at the elementary level, and that's an elementary program. And so we went through an uphill climb with them to understand that it's not a negotiable, that it has to be in place. What are the best practices, like Matt just talked about? What does it look like? Probably the best case example of that is Liberty. So actually, if you were to call the DE and ask them, hey, do you have an example of a school that's actually doing PBIS well? they would give you Liberty as the example. The woman who does the PBIS there loves Liberty, has focused on them and has featured them in her little newsletter that she does. And so they've done a really nice job of it. Now, you talk to Scott and he'd tell you that that happened out of necessity. Their first year was such a struggle from a cultural standpoint that their faculty came together that summer and said, we got to do something. And when the life buoy that was thrown to them was PBIS, we'll take it, right?
Interesting.
For a drowning man, everything looks like a raft. And so they were willing to jump on. Struggled a little bit more, still do, I would say, Matt jump in there, but City and West, implementation not as smooth, not that same sense of urgency that Liberty had, and so because of that, it's just a little bit more, it's been a little slower process.
So what's the expectation then for Weston?
So the expectation is they're all doing it,
Right.
and they're all moving that direction, and like Steve said, I think Liberty was able to accelerate it through faster because they did a lot of work that first year in culture and climate and some of those things, some of those foundational pieces. But once they found out, yes, we can say we have routines, but actually implementing those routines
Yeah.
becomes difficult. So they started it somewhat first year, but really dug in that first summer to make sure those were in place and performing at a high level as they started year 2. But if you looked at some of the West High materials that you'd see come out early for this school year, you're going to see PBIS references, you're going to see some of those things. Allison Brune, who's been instrumental working with the university and with us, has also volunteered to come in and work with our other high school teams as well. And then kind of the same thing at the junior high. We just need to do some reset on that. But that's been in place and performing pretty well at all 3 of our junior high campuses for a while. But so PBIS specific, yeah, you'll see our secondary system all committed to PBIS and doing that. And so back to your resistance question, I don't think there's resistance on the MTSS thing. In a broader sense, I think it's more, we're doing the best we know how. And so that's where then again, as a district and director team, we have to help them if they don't have interventions or systems in place. How do we help you come in and put those systems in place? PBIS is just one good example of that going on, and then how we can offer support and help them get those things up and going.
Do we have you set goals for your secondary schools in terms of how far you expect them to get in their implementation this coming year or in a 3-year time frame?
Right.
Just like, how do we know we're making the progress that we need to make?
Well, so the first thing is, like I said, creating what to look for is in those MTSS in the categories. And so again, PBIS and behavior would just be one of those categories, curriculum and, the conversation we were just having here about what should a first grader know or what should a high schooler know, we have to know what our core is for our curriculum and academics. And so if they're not meeting core, then what are the academic interventions we put in place? So we have different levels of that MTSS. So the first thing is to share the look for with them and then to self-evaluate about where they're at following kind of this SAMI process, and then to set goals about how will we get there. And so that goes all the way into how we've talked about reformatting administrator meetings this year, as more of a teaming concept and maybe less typical business and more of a conversation about growth and trying to improve performance. So.
That's good.
So the SAMI instrument is really awesome. It came out of the differentiated accountability work, the ESSA work that's going on, and buildings that are deemed as targeted or comprehensive by the state must go through the SAMI process where it has us looking at all 5 petals of that atomic flower. If you remember the atomic flower: leadership, infrastructure, universal instruction, interventions, assessment. But what we've done is about 3/4 of my elementary buildings, not all of them are designated, but have gone through the SAMI process. And when you do that, you answer roughly 6 to 9 questions and then show, also detail where you're at on the rubric within each of those questions. And so you can look at it, engage as an ILT team, where you're at in the MTSS process with both reading, with reading, math, social, emotional, behavioral. This year, my goal is to take it to those other 6 buildings that haven't done the work, because again, it's all about your MTSS processes back in the building. We can try to set the landscape and what the expectations are at the district level, but team by team, they have to know about how well they're doing implementing that. Matt's got about half of his teams or 2/3 of his teams already involved in that work as well. So the goal would be all 27 attendance centers having completed that SAMI as just a gauge for where they're at and where they want to be.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just to say, so when you guys did this work, we had some conversations internally a little bit about too. There's things that are compliance that we have to do, but when we talk about compliance, sometimes those compliance pieces are because it's the right work to do. And I think the thing we believe in is that those pieces were being complied are obligated to do
Mhm.
is the right work. This MTSS work, the pieces in the SAMI, those plans, I mean, the state is on to the right path, I think, in that regard, you know, and so they're tasking us with some of the right things to do and to be putting in
They're not
place
just
in our
have to
schools.
do's, they're need to do's.
Yeah.
Right? And I think one of the things that you see coming out of this, and it's one of the reasons that you can actually transition to this team-oriented conversation about the work as opposed to more of that, I don't know, sit and tell, sit and listen, sit and get type of thing, is that now that there's a more universal implementation, especially at the secondary level, there's common language. And there's also a willingness to look at other schools for examples of things that are going well and then trying to replicate that. Obviously a lot more cooperative and competitive from that standpoint. So I think that that's a change that you've seen in the last 3 to 4 years. And it's really now starting to hit that escalator part of the curve, which is a plus because we'll bring along those areas of the organization that have moved slower. Will now be able to move quicker, and they can look to their peers for good examples of how to implement, which was hard. Getting the flywheel turning was very difficult for us at the secondary level. Elementary level, they latched on to the ideas, they could see it in action, especially, you know, you got kids all day, so you could see the benefits of that consistency. You're having kids hour to hour to hour. If everyone's not implementing consistently, I don't see the benefits of it because the kids that I get may not have had it consistently implemented in the period before, so I'm not seeing that improvement in the period that I have now. So we had a little bit more of a struggle at the secondary level with some of these things, but I think now we're starting to see that flywheel turning, and it's a little bit easier to ask for more.
How do you see this implementation sort of more consistently changing or influencing culture in the district? I mean, you talk about how the building meetings might change and the conversation.
Yeah, with our principals, how it changes, I think it's just about having a culture of growth, right? That we're honest and vulnerable about where we're at and the things we need to improve on, and then sharing with each other strategies to do that. And I think our responsibility as a district is to then say, okay, maybe you're not where you need to be in this certain area, but here's how we can help you get there, you know, and having those conversations with them. So I think the biggest cultural point is how they tie it back to the belief statements they have in their own buildings. You know, I mean, when we look at what those different school models are, you know, at Liberty, you've heard Scott talk about their core values before. John talks about the school that leads, you know, the West Highway. I mean, all those different things. I mean, that just goes right to your core mission, and then all these other things can feed through it. So I think Steve talking about that flywheel to get it turning. I mean, you have 100 staff members, right? You have so many more adults that interact with kids, and so to get consensus and consistency throughout those buildings, it's just a little bit of a heavier lift, but it doesn't mean it's any less needed.
And sort of where I was going to is just wondering, you know, if this foundational implementation is going to help us on some of the other cultural things. And I'm using that's such a broad term. I'm sorry for that, but you hear. I mean, diversity and inclusion, you know, is this going to help us, maybe, you know, help all students feel supported and families supported and included, and staff, thank you. Will it help, we hear from time to time, you know, the concern that there's a retaliatory culture. I mean, that pops up from time to time in emails to us, and I have no idea how to judge that, but can this sort of implementation consistently help relieve some of those interactions or perceptions?
So I'd actually look down to the elementary level then and say that one of the things that we've seen, because they're a little bit further in front in terms of the pathway here, and there's a real empowerment that goes along with successful implementation. So when you have successful implementation, when both sides of your MTSS triangle are functioning effectively, on the academic side and the social emotional behavior support side, when they're both functioning effectively, you're really empowering the teachers. And I know that both Amy and Matt and our building administrators, we go through, it's not all forward momentum, right? So we're doing a little of this because there are times, and you'll talk to building administrators when you're out there, that teachers are still trying to grasp the idea of what's that tier 1 intervention, whether it's academic or behavior or something else, that they still see something in taking place in the classroom academically or behaviorally, and they want to jump to a tier 2 intervention. But I would say that now, more than we might have seen 2 or 3 years ago, when we push back on building administrators or they push back on staff and say, what have you done at the tier 1 intervention level? Where before there was real resistance to that. Now there's, oh yeah, that's right. Okay, have we done these things? And if so, what's the efficacy? How do they work? If that one didn't work, did I try something else? Because remember, and Matt alluded to this earlier, you know, PBIS is one part of it. So when you look at it, and I go back to that tape model, right? There are multiple things that are tools at each of those levels. And so if one doesn't work, are you using something else? If that didn't work, did you use something else? Who are your resources that you can turn to? So one of the things that you see developing over time is a real sense of empowerment among the staff. Because the more tools that they have command over, the more opportunity that they have to try to address those issues when they're small, in their classroom, before it's gotten out of hand, if you will. And you need to look at a tier 2 or a tier 3 intervention. So that's a real growth process for staff, but that's something that's never going to end because we just hired 68 new teachers, right? So they're going to need to go through this too. They're going to need to get familiar with all those 68 tools, or those tools, all those 68 teachers are going to have to get rid of familiar with the tier 1 tools. So if they came to us, about half of them come experience from other districts. If they don't have that, something happens, they jump right away to a tier 2 solution. That's our opportunity to go back to them and say, what have you done at the tier 1 level? So that's always going to be part of our growth process, but I would say that it's accelerating because when you have empowered teachers that can be peer leaders to those that are learning, I think that really serves, again, as an opportunity for us.
Yeah, because it's a culture too. I think that becomes the norm. So when the new person comes in, they're not fighting against them, right? That's just how it is, and it's easier for them to realize that that's the standard because that's what everybody else is doing. If everybody else is sort of doing their own thing, what's a new person supposed to do?
Well, we spent a lot of time with new teachers telling them that they need to ask for help. And one of the things that we got from feedback from teachers when they were here for their 4 days last week was that it's okay if I fail because I can reach out and ask for assistance and move forward with it. That's really important from a cultural standpoint because if something didn't work well, do I hide it or do I reach out to the teacher next door and say, I was working with Steve and this didn't work, what should I do next? And so we spent a lot of time helping them understand that that is actually a critical component of the success in our culture. So acknowledge when there's failure, seek assistance, try again. So that goes back to that empowerment piece, you know. It's not that you didn't do the right thing with the student and there was only one opportunity to do it. It's that didn't work. What might work?
That's good. Thanks, Sean, for bringing that up. That was a really good call out. So I want to move on to CTE. We did the career pathways piece, and then we haven't made any progress on pre-apprenticeship programs, and we didn't end up really having a really good discussion at a work session. We might have touched on it, but we didn't go into any depth. I do know that through the TEL piece of work, there is that bringing in different parts of our region and community to help understand that we're all learner and what are the needs and skills and opportunities that we provide in the K-12 setting. And I'm sure with Phil's earlier points tonight that some of that needs to be something around ag or manufacturing or more of the skilled trades. And I don't know, Steve, if there's anything coming from, I have not been able to make the last few meetings there, so I'm not quite as current on that as I should be. But that engagement with the community will help us get the framework for driving that implementation, is my sense.
A couple of things with that. So first of all, I think one of the things that we recognized was a problem last year was that we have a large number of kids that would like to see something else through a job shadow or through an internship, and there simply weren't experiences available. And so we sat down with a workplace learning committee, workplace learning, what's the C?
What'd you say?
Kirkwood Workplace Learning Connection. And said, help us understand, they do a great job placing kids. But what they have not been telling us is, who do they have that they were unable to place? So we went to them and said, okay, who can't you place? I'll just give you one example. One of the things that they told us is we have far more kids interested in architecture than we have architects that had placements for them. So we said, okay, we need to know what those are, and then worked with ICAD and the chamber to say, essentially, we need 1,000 new experiences for kids. So they've been wonderful over the past 4 months in really pushing out through their membership base a better understanding of what it means to host a job shadow, what it means to host an internship. They've seen a real uptick in the number of companies that are willing to volunteer to host students.
And how does that get published and communicated, and how are those opportunities expressed in the district to students and families?
It comes through school counselors. It's a regular feature in the communication that comes out from the principal's offices at the high schools. Specific classes are really strong in it. If you go to our business classes in particular, or some of our extracurriculars, Business Professionals of America, they work really hard to get the students connected with Kirkwood and with the Workplace Learning Center, and then get them out into the field to see that. So what we're hoping is, we've had a high demand side, and the supply side has been a little bit weak, but we're hoping now that we'll actually be able to create far more opportunities than students had access to in the past, so that they actually can try out some of those things that they may have less familiarity with, but may have an interest in. So that's been one big plus. That Battelle work, met with them again on Monday, and this is ICAD, the Chamber, Iowa Cedar Rapids, the ICR group, and Battelle is out of Cincinnati, Ohio, a nonprofit that's done, Columbus, sorry. Columbus, Cleveland, yeah. They've done this work all over the country, where they come in, they engage the community, they work to understand what it is that the community expects from their schools, to put that together in actionable format for the board to consider changes in what they teach, when they teach, how they teach, et cetera, to make sure that they're meeting the expectations, whether the kids are coming out of elementary school, middle level, or out of the high school. The Chamber, ICR, ICAD combined is willing to foot most of the bill for it, which we're really excited about. Like everyone to have a little skin in the game, so we committed up to $5,000 for that, so they're doing the rest of the fundraising right now. Actually had a conversation with Battelle today, should have a revised contract back from them probably for the September 24th board meeting, so for us to take a look at. But I think it's a real great opportunity for us to get the business community directly connected in the conversation.
Well, to what Chase said the other night, when we were talking about it, asking for advice from staff, business community and Tim Group came before the board a year ago with an opportunity in the spring for students to get 2 hours of free college credit to work on a home build here in Iowa City. And it was opportunities in architecture, it was opportunities in construction. We all were there. We all heard it. It was free. You got a 10-hour OSHA card, which is good for life, and is going to look great on a resume anywhere you go. And out of the Iowa City School District, only 2 students availed themselves of that opportunity. There were 16 or 18 from Durant that drove from Durant to Iowa City. And like Chase said, if you solicit and you don't do anything, well, where does that get you? And the spring meeting was supposed to be a catalyst, because we had an ag program, we were going forward, and we were adding things to the community and trying to get people involved. And we have got to collectively do more than the regional center. And it's got to meet a 5-minute bell schedule, and it's got to be in our buildings. There's a lot of businesses that will be involved, but we've got to help push it. And one of the 2 students from the Iowa School District that was involved was Janice Winter, the gal that's running for city council. Is that right?
Yeah,
Is that her
Janice.
first name? Her daughter was the one that was involved in it. And she was a student at West High and is now, I think, taking construction at Kirkwood up in Rapids. So we've got to get those opportunities and things, but it's also going to come from us, and it's not just the white-collar business community, it's got to be the blue-collar business community. And the Steam Fitters Union facility up in Cedar Rapids has 16 different trade unions that would love to be involved with our schools. The 2060 Carpenters have an office here in town. They've spoken with us many times concerning curriculum and things like that. So there are trades in our community here that want to be involved.
So one place, and I have obviously much expertise in this area, but one place that I see as a parent as a bit of a bottleneck is that kids don't necessarily avail themselves of these opportunities. And when their parents suggest, that might be a good thing to do, they may or may not choose to do that. And I'm wondering, like I've seen it in the West Side parent newsletter, like you said, Steve, but there's clearly not many kids doing these things. And I know the supply or the availability of options has been an issue, but now that's ramping up. Is there anything to keep us from making it a requirement, not a hard requirement, a soft requirement, that kids have to do some sort of workplace day? And I don't know how we would do that. I mean, changing our PD schedule, we talked the benefits of changing that to a full day would be that there would be a day available for that, but that wouldn't be optional, of course, because that wouldn't be a school day for the kids, but I don't know, is there?
Yeah.
And I don't need an answer
Board
right
sets
now,
graduation requirements.
But
They have to meet the state minimum, but you can
Well,
set,
I just see that
Higher
there's
graduation
opportunities, like Phil's talked about, there's opportunities, and a lot of kids are going into college not having a clue what they want to do.
Yeah, that's my worry too,
so-
is, because that's something that's happening right now. Kids are gonna go to, right now, start a 4-year degree that will get them debt. And maybe a $10 an hour job at Pearson that isn't anything they thought. And so yeah, I mean, I guess that's my question. How do we drive it? How can we promote it more? Because guidance counselors, if you got 400 kids, maybe you get a few kids that kind of cross your radar.
So I don't have an answer to that specific question and Phil's regarding the specific experience or the job experiences, but building off of what Steve said, they had just gone through the portrait of the graduate work in Fairfax when I got there, and what it did, it really changed the conversation in the schools and the community about what it meant to be a graduate in Fairfax County. So I think the questions you're asking are the right ones, and when Battelle comes here, I think they're going to be able to help not the board and the community work through that as they put those pieces together, because it truly does. It starts looking at a graduate different, not just as trying to get, not just the old adage of college and career ready, but looking at some of the soft 21st century skills, but looking at pathways for individuals that don't want to go the college route or looking for different opportunities. And so I wasn't there to see them actually put it together, but I do know that it changed the conversations, even to Jana, what you're talking about with math, it changed the culture in the buildings, and not just at the high school level, but all the way down through the feeder programs in the elementary, because they weren't looking at it in terms of, well, this is just a diploma that you get. It was how do you build towards this, and it was everybody's responsibility. And so
Resume, instead of
Yeah.
getting a diploma, you get a
And I-
resume with skills.
and I don't know if-
listed that you can
I don't know if
use
you were
to
there.
find a
And
job.
so, Phil, and so I know that's not an answer to your question, but I think there's an opportunity because we are really looking at the whole person, right? It's not just, it's a portrait of a graduate, not just you're getting a diploma. And so there isn't a good answer for it right now, but I think that there'll be an opportunity through the process if we do partner.
Right,
with
well,
folks
and
to do that.
I'm not sounding like a broken record, but if people would really look into FFA, FFA has job opportunities and job shadowing built right into it. And if you ever see an FFA member with a gold chain on the side, the girls have them, the guys have them. That means that they had an SE project that had a profit of $2,000. And these can be anything from selling flowers to hogs to helping with a community project. Some FFA chapters do the groundwork in their smaller schools. But there's all kinds of opportunities in there. To Lori's point, a lot of school districts, when you have those periods between Christmas and Thanksgiving, that many times teachers will show a movie, or it's kind of like, well, we're knocking off, we're not really in the heavy study mode, they'll have activities. And it's might be 3-4 days where they can sign up for things like kayaking or exploration and things like that. There's opportunities there to get people into doing things. But you know, the way you get kids interested in those things is you get them actually doing things with their hands and right away. Not theory, not riding the bus for a half an hour to the regional center and for crying out loud, that we've got more tools in our Hy-Vee warehouse, if they're still there, than the regional center has. And they're collecting dust.
But Phil, we've talked extensively about the regional center isn't the problem. The problem is we don't have our whole system articulated for those front-end opportunities to expose kids to it. Those are great high-end opportunities for kids if they know that's what they're interested in.
Well,
I
it has to
think
be- has to be
Lori's
building
point,
block.
Lori's point about them not necessarily knowing what they want to pursue and what they want to do is somewhat what hurts our enrollment in some of those courses and some of those areas we'd like to see filled. And so part of this conversation around the portrait of the graduate is how do we get kids looped into knowing what my interest is. That has to do with some course taking early on in junior high or early high school. That has to do with exposing them to what it looks like in work. But I think to keep saying the regional center is the problem isn't necessarily accurate. It's a downstream problem a little bit for us on that.
Well, I think one of the things that we heard from our conversation with Battelle was, yeah, it changes the conversation at the adult level. But I think one of the things that's really important is they talked about changing the conversation at the kid level. Because if the kid's pursuit is 4 years of science and 4 years of math and 4 years of social studies and 4 years of English and 4 years of world language and 4 years of music and enough service hours to get my cord because I'm going to get into college, that's a different focus than when you look at these portraits that come out of these districts that have done it, that talk about the soft skills, that talk about what those knowledge, skills, and abilities are that aren't tied to biology or calculus or British literature. That changes the framework, and they were really emphatic about how that changes the framework of the way kids think about school. And part of our problem is, and it goes to Matt's conversation earlier, it's a demand side problem. If kids don't sign up for things, some parents make them.
Apparently I'm not one of them. I tried.
They don't participate real actively when you make them, but you feel better about it. If the kids aren't engaged in understanding what the return on investment for them is, then they don't participate in it. And so part of it for us is helping develop that demand side for kids to do things that are outside of that 4-4-4-4-4 block. And even if they're inside that, because that's still the area that they're pursuing, that it's more purpose-driven.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things that we heard pretty loudly from the folks in Battelle was, you're going to change adult conversation about it, but you're also going to change student conversation about it. And that's almost more important because we can't always make them do it. They have to want to do it. Well, how do you create that demand from the kids?
But then it is going to require us to change how we even talk about the curriculum of education.
Absolutely.
To your point, it's not
They
just
tell you that.
Go take pre-algebra. It's, you're learning these skills so that you can apply them in these ways.
Right.
And so to your point, it's intentional, it makes it a lot more meaningful.
Yeah.
I mean.
It's not just
yeah.
doing school.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I've gone through this just recently myself as a parent with a 20 and 22-year-old, and a lot of the sentiments that you're sharing are exactly what I feel on the flip side of it. Like, they didn't get exposed to enough of the various job sectors, and not only the various job sectors, but all that can happen within it, from the $12 an hour job to the $100 an hour job can still fit in the same job sector. How can we do that? And even with all this testing, or, I'm more compatible to this position, I still wish they would have been exposed to a ton of different job sectors along the course of the way. I don't know how you make those opportunities happen.
Throw this out there whether they're interested in it or not.
Exactly.
And maybe this is more curriculum, but, I think for producing citizens, they should be able to pass the citizenship test. I mean, that just makes a lot of sense.
There's a
Like,
social
if
studies
you're gonna
test.
be able to vote,
I'm fine
you
with that.
want to understand what the heck this is all about. Just,
Mm-hmm.
in a democracy, if you don't know that there are 3 branches of government at the time you graduate high school, that's part of the reason we're in the world. Just put that out.
That just
something that Lori said kind of stuck with me. She talked about, as a parent making suggestions and what the kids listen to. What I found as a parent is that the suggestions I've made has fallen on deaf ears, but when someone at the school has made the same suggestion I made, it's heard. And I think that's an important thing to take, that as parents, you can only do so much trying to get kids to do something because they're going to rebel the whole time. But, as a school district, if we are also putting those opportunities out there and encouraging them and saying, here's all the cool things that are out there, it carries a little bit more weight than a parent would in some cases. Maybe most kids will.
And you're absolutely right. And in our discussion about the ethnicity course, well, when you got a teacher promoting it, you get kids taking it. We're never going to have kids signing up for an ag course that doesn't exist. You've got to create it. You got to get an instructor. You got to get a greenhouse that gets these things growing. You got to have the day where there's actual animals on the school, and they get to see them. Isn't that neat? And the growth and the cycle of life. Then you have that growth. But when you don't, trying to get people interested in something that there's no one promoting, and it's just an idea and it's stagnant on the course book, it doesn't go that way. Or the woodworking project, when you have the trophy cabinet, you go by and you see all the nice woodworking products that students have made. Well, yeah, I'd be interested. I'd like to make something like that. I might be interested in that. If there's an instructor that says, you can make that, I can help show you, then you have kids take it.
We've also talked to the chamber about the role of externships, so that there's opportunities for teachers, especially during the summer, to get out and actually see some of these career areas in operation, because they may know as little about them as the students do. So if we're trying to get our staff, to your point, Sean, to help kids consider what their options are, they need to have seen those in action. What does it look like to work at IDT, to work at Shields, to work at the university, to work at the hospital? If what they've done is come out of school and go into teaching, they only know that maybe abstractly from a neighbor, a friend, a relative who might do it. The conversation we've had with the chamber is, how do we get them in to do a meaningful 1, 2, 3, 4 week experience, work through a cycle of jobs there so that they can actually see what does that look like. They understand what does it take to succeed there, not just, to your point earlier, what are the soft skills, what are the hard skills that you need. Yeah, you do need to take pre-algebra, but you also need to learn this.
That's a great point, because part of the issue, like you said, Steve, is you can set the requirement, but what's the capacity to make that happen? Who are the staff members then connecting with all those opportunities? Because like you started with, the workplace learning connections is great, and they say they'd like to have more requests. Well, they can't meet our demand, on a request. When we ask that question of them, well, do you have room to place more kids? Well, no, we don't. They're placing all the kids they can. It's a delayed response. And so if the goal is going to be to increase that requirement that every kid does something like that, then we need to have a plan on who's going to be the one connecting them with all those things, and how do they know about them, just like he was talking about.
Could we make sure, or try, so chamber, but also bring in the unions and the trades in, because they have some capacity, maybe that,
Absolutely.
and maybe those aren't normal buddies, chamber and the unions that are hanging out.
Correct.
But I think, we're all got, the same ideas in mind
Well,
that
we certainly can have those conversations.
Yeah.
We don't have to wait for the chamber to reach out. We can start those
yeah,
conversations.
well, ours being as a part of the right, as a piece of this, because it's a lot of employment, it's a lot of.
So the profile of the graduate, that process, that will be broad. That would be inclusive of trades, unions, business community, health community. It's going to be
Yeah, it's everybody.
Agriculture. It's not just the
Right.
chamber.
No, they're just paying for it.
Right. Because that could be a vehicle for pulling all this together. And then the other thing, the externship one, maybe we add that to the PD concept, because it is sort of professional development, just in a sort of different flavor. One thing I wanted to highlight, we've had under CTE the infusing SEL, but I'm sort of hearing that the MTSS piece sort of gets at some of that. Maybe the SEL piece really does fit better there. Yeah. What happens at the legislative session? I should remember this about the literacy course, literacy requirement.
The third grade one?
Well, but we were monitoring literacy.
Well, the financial literacy requirement, they delayed that.
It delayed it, okay.
Yep.
so- okay.
So then we're able to look at it and actually figure out how it either fits in our curriculum or works as a standalone, but then that gives students time to work it into their schedule.
All right. Special ed, I mean,
Oh, there we go.
Lisa gave us some overviews this, and updates this year. I feel like that's progressing.
Yeah, I think we're making really good progress in our special ed programming. The things that are highlighted on there, obviously made some significant changes in 103. I'm not sure if you were following it, but recently the State Board of Ed rejected the proposed changes in 103. That doesn't stop us from moving forward with essentially complying with many of the things that were in that proposed legislation. So I would presume eventually it's going to wind up back in front of the Board of Ed and they will approve something, but by that point in time, hopefully everything that we're doing will be far ahead of what they're asking for. So we're moving in the right direction there.
And I think I'm right, because I talked with Julian a little bit. They were gonna go back for more info, which starts the whole process over.
Yeah.
But it sounded like it was kind of trying to find agreement on a couple specific areas.
They tabled some things, so,
Like ACLU
yep.
and
Yeah.
schools and.
Rather than kind of rebooting it, they tabled that portion of it so they can come back and revisit it.
Facilities, well, we've done a heck of a lot of facilities work this year, but I think one of the things that's been looming, and it came up in the last meeting when Dwayne was going through a list of projects, and then, oh, this is a 2.0, no, this is a 2.0, and the backlog of stuff that's been slated for 2.0 is long, and we really haven't even had a conversation about it yet. People are assuming, I can't, which elementary principal is assuming around,
Oh.
was it Chris?
I was just going to say, most of our principals are
Yeah.
assuming,
So,
because they all have items on the list.
they do, and Hills, we know, we need work in Hills, and it's just, we just, it's, I don't know what other directors think, but, you know, somewhere along the way, we're all gonna have to have a conversation around what that next wave of facilities work looks like.
I would imagine
Give us
with
a
the bond
brief
work
case.
done and the 10-year FMP, it's not gonna be as long.
No.
There aren't gonna be like
No.
a whole bunch of new schools on it, and obviously HVAC, and some of the big heavy, you know, the updates that we've done are done. And so hopefully, as we do talk about facilities a lot, we sort of already kind of know what these are, there's not a whole lot of going on gathering data, we can just put that list together in relatively short order.
Put a timeline on it.
Put a timeline on it, get a price tag, and then kind of know, you know, and then we'll know when that save dollars will kick in, and we know that that's there, so there's
So
not.
say, figure out how we'll pay for it,
Yeah.
right?
Well, we know
Right.
save's coming and when, so we,
If you'd have looked at this list in isolation without having the ability to compare it to the work that we've done, you'd have an oh my God moment. But for us, we look at it in comparison to the last 7 years, doable,
And then we need to
scalable.
prioritize them,
Yep.
I mean, these are,
Exactly. We'll have to lay it out just like we did the last one and say, here's all the projects that we see right now that we need to do over the next, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 5, whatever it is, but lay it out. Then we'll have to go through a process where the board and community help us prioritize it.
yeah.
This school goes first, the school goes last, these schools go in the middle, looks like this. And then we'll have to look at it from a logistics standpoint, make sure we can phase through it, look at the finance piece for it. Having been through it once before, this will be, maybe easier isn't the right term, but this will be a more familiar process, and so I think it will be more efficient.
that's what I'm talking about, efficient, quicker,
Yeah.
spend less time,
Yep.
move on to other.
And I think the community has a better understanding of it too, so I think it makes it easier to go through the community conversation too. Because they've seen it, they know what it looks like, they know the process, they know how it unfolds over time. Even if you're Lemmy at the end of the line, I think they get that a little bit better now than they may have 7 years ago.
Actually, you made me chuckle though, as you said quicker, right? The first one, as we talked about this morning, 10 years actually basically accomplished, right, in 7.5. And we also know there's some changes on the personnel side as you look at that. And so, I guess Dwayne kind of made some things public, and so we need to look at that as part of the equation too.
Right.
Okay, what are we gonna do and how's that affected, things like that. But yeah, it's all part of that planning over the next however many months.
I was gonna say that I think the previous plan, a lot of it was, well, it was kind of driving the bus, right? It was a lot of facilities, and a lot of it stemmed from having equitable environments in the
Mhm.
schools, like
Yep.
the air conditioning piece is the biggest example.
ADA
that kind of
accessibility to
stuff.
get in and out of schools,
I
yeah.
think as we move forward, I would prefer to have some of the other bigger decisions where we're going directionally on programming, whether we want to look at preschool centers, whether we want to see is a middle school format the right thing for kids learning wise, and if those are the things we would do, have that then drive the facility stuff, but figure out what do we want to do for the educational piece across the board first, and then the facilities can follow. Because I think we need to flip that script a little bit, because we do have a much better equitable environment at our schools. It's not perfect yet, we know that, there are already things that need to be done, but there will be other driving factors that I think would be more important to discuss than just say, hey, that school needs another gym.
Yeah, thinking things like operational efficiency and some ideas, magnets and things year round, do those ideas drive facilities conversation?
The other thing that we had under facilities, we covered inclusive play guidelines too.
Yeah, well, Chase is no longer in, and part of the, and I'm not gonna single Chase out, but part of our challenges has been, we've had changes in, Kingsley started when Chase was in, now it's been.
And it's hard to get the committee to meet, I think,
Well,
too, 'cause
no,
schedules and stuff.
we've got a group that's meeting, and I mean, we've been doing it. We're getting very close. At our last meeting, we were talking about when do we actually present to the board.
Okay.
It's looking, it's close to October, either the first or second meeting. And we're coming up with, when I started, I didn't think we would have something like what we're getting close to having. Hopefully, we will be able to present to the board a document where any school that wants to go and put in an inclusive playground has a way of evaluating each individual piece by what it serves for PE, what it serves for social, emotional, all of these things, and you'll have kind of a score on how that facility would look. Because what's come before us, and we have people from the community, and some of those people in the community are on our board, on our committee, saying that, this one may be ADA, but ADA is not inclusive. So we will have a way to look and evaluate
That's great.
and be able to kind of have a score so the board can have great confidence as, okay, this, at the time, this is way better than what we have, it meets all these areas, and it should be extremely helpful for any school that then wants to put something in. It makes them think about some of the things they should be, like the equity thing, the equity lens. It's an inclusive lens that you may not think about it, and we have a new community member on our board, because one was no longer there, has a student that's blind. And so, the things that, something that, when we were talking about inclusive, that was one of the things that was really on our radar, but one of the things, some of those discussions have been helpful in this as well. But no, I'm very optimistic we'll have something very good, and we've had challenges with our our experts meeting and things like that. So, but I'm hopeful we're in the point where we're tying everything together.
That's awesome, that's a fantastic update, thank you.
I think, but the only thing I would add, took what you said at board meeting a couple months ago to heart, and why we set the timeline we did.
I see
You were
that
pretty-
meeting.
Yeah, the team's got the point. And why that timeline is set is if it comes to the board by the middle of October, there would not, it's in time for it to be in place before the next round of playgrounds.
Fantastic,
So,
that's really, really good.
for
And
next-
isn't
for
that
next year.
scoring mechanism, so that was decided?
Right, well,
priorities too,
and that's exciting because it has actual like pictures of the different pieces, and it explains, okay, how this would be for someone with autism, how this would be with someone with physical challenges and accessibility and things like that. So there's been a lot of things we've done with it. Unlike the IPM committee, and that was one that I was on with as well, there were places that had already had IPM things that we could kind of take bits and pieces. We're creating something new, and I think it's going to be very helpful.
And for the point that Joel was making is it wasn't necessarily trouble with our consultants, it's just that everybody was very excited. We pulled the committee together and they did a nice job helping put together the RFP, but then we had to rebid it because we built it into two groups. And really at that point, after 2020, what we should have done was timelines on the consultants, said, okay, everybody, we know what these timelines are. We'll let the committee go dormant until the consultants come back, but we kept trying to kind of chip away, and people were anxious, and when we didn't have what we needed from the consultants, I think people, just as I said, got a little antsy. But now, Phil's right, the work is really moving because those reports have come back, and so now the committee can really jump in and do their work, so that they're ready to go for the next round.
That's fantastic. That's great progress. So then the other thing that we had under facilities was the safety committee, and so that was obviously more, I think, around some of the bargaining components of the building, right? Making sure the vestibule locks and stuff like that. We do need to have a conversation around the priority around safety, maybe, and what our next steps need to be on like the threat assessment and how we're gonna progress there. We are just getting so much input from the community, we have to, I think, address it some way or another. But I don't think that conversation is as much a facilities question as it is a threat assessment or a safety. So I'm going to hunt on safety threat assessment just to get through the rest of these items in here. Board governance and development. We made progress on revising
Some progress, when school ended, things happened that progress stalled over the summer, but we want to try and really tackle that before all of us that have been invested in that are, the election in November. So we're going to start meeting, have an aggressive meeting plan up until November. So some people may not be happy because we're gonna be meeting quite a bit, or we'll just learn to love each other a lot, right, Paul?
And Sean too.
Sean, but no, there's hopefully, I think the policy review goes in front of the board second meeting. The update, is it on the agenda usually second meeting?
I can't remember. I should know.
It's second meeting, policy update.
Yeah.
I can't-
Yes, I believe so. Okay.
The first meeting.
So then, the second September meeting, there'll be an update.
Okay. But the goal is to get them revamped in the new ISB
As far,
framework.
my goal is all of
November.
them, but as far as we can before
Right.
November.
Okay. We didn't do a second learning activity on restorative practices. We did one discussion of restorative stuff, I want to say, it was last fall, it was a year ago, it was one of our ed committee meetings, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But so we can talk, we want to try to continue our exposure to restorative practices, whether we do a circle, I mean, there's been a conversation about something like that.
Or does that wrap into some of the other stuff, the social emotions? I mean, to me, it comes under a bigger umbrella with what we're doing with social emotional. Lisa had a great, very long acronym with all of it.
SEBMH.
SEMBH.
Say it, what is it?
SEBMH, social.
Social emotional behavior mental health.
Yes, yeah, I think we did,
SEBMH.
because I heard, as Lisa was talking, and
Behavior mental health.
others, last work session, restorative practices came up as a tool that people were using and mental health awareness discussion, so maybe it gets wrapped into.
Yeah, it's a piece of it.
Climate
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah, and just, and then, because it sounds to me like that's, there's a lot of work going on there, it's kind of the heart of it, and so I guess I don't know how other board members feel, if you want.
Well, this is really about board development though, right?
Yeah,
Like
it was.
us
Yeah.
personally trying to have a better understanding of ourselves, right? To, you know, help be better leaders in that vein. If we're saying, yeah, do more restorative stuff in the schools. And I don't even know what that means,
Yeah.
right? You know, on an internal
Yeah.
level, right? So I think, I mean, I would still appreciate
Okay.
doing something,
Okay.
whether it's small groups. I know we talked about circles and they're kind of a private thing. Having everybody do it in a public meeting is a little weird, so logistics of it is, I don't know, but
We don't like pass the stick, we're like, nope, nothing for me. Pass it to the next person. No.
without doing it personally, I feel like I'm just spouting out buzzwords that I hear.
You know what I mean? Like, yep.
Sean, I would.
So what do folks think about this? Because it is, I think it really breaks down the meaningfulness when it's public. Bless you. But I got a lot out of going to a staff one at West High, where they just had a circle and I just sat in it and so I mean, would there be opportunities maybe as
Yeah, I mean, we did it, I
in
went to
pairs or
an
threes?
they went to an equity committee meeting, and that's how the meeting started.
Well, they just start
It
all
was
in
just,
that
it was
way.
great,
That's how
and it was just,
yeah.
you get the experience by going to things where that's a practice.
So I mean, that might be a more genuine way to, but then it's time and scheduling and I couldn't go to the one at West, you know, the recent one because it just, it was a busy week, so.
So is West the only, like,
It's just because I know folks over
Oh,
there, Rick was
okay.
like, oh, hey, come
do
over.
we know who else does that type of format, which school, secondary school? I'm looking at you, Matt, just because
It's all right.
I know you have all the answers.
Yeah, no, we have, I'd say
On
on
this.
some level,
Yeah.
a circle's happening in every
Somewhere.
school somewhere.
Okay.
You know, now what level, like if it's happening in the
Different models.
principal's office or if it's a teacher
Yep.
that's been trained and using them in their classroom.
Yep.
Yeah, so,
Well, could you guys?
I mean, if that's something you're
identify-
interested, we could connect you with some of those
Yeah, yeah,
opportunities.
ones that would be
At least
comfortable,
when
right,
it's
with us coming in.
the right format, yeah.
The other thing I would invite you to, your second Wednesdays of the month, in the afternoons, well, we have DPO, but in the afternoons for our IDS principal meetings at the elementary level, it's all gonna be PBIS focused. Sometimes we'll be together as a large group, and sometimes we'll be broken out whether the buildings are focused on tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, but you'd be welcome to come in at any time, second Wednesdays of the month.
What time?
We'd probably start it back up by 1 o'clock, so maybe late coming
So
back from
after,
Can we get that in
Yeah.
an email?
Yeah.
Yeah, and an email with the schedule, because that's something I can plan. Because that I think, I mean, I don't know, what do you think, Sean, to go see it in action, I mean.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's more comfort level on our side if we organize something ourselves, but then, as you said, maybe it's not genuine as a public meeting, but then I'm also mindful of just jumping in to somebody else's thing and, you know, I'm making it awkward for someone else. So as long as it's something that makes sense for the group that's having it and then us as the spectator more so than maybe a participant, but, you know, I don't want to create discomfort on any side.
Yeah, I hear you. That,
but if you say we'd be welcome to
Yeah,
attend.
that's PBIS, so it's not necessarily restorative practices focused. Sometimes Laura Petrell will come in and do climate culture things, which oftentimes she's talking about restorative practices, whether it's morning meetings, restorative circles, things like that. But that's just something we're gonna have embedded all year long. So if you're interested more about PBIS tiers, there's an opportunity for you.
I just sent a note to Laura, so I'll kind of check in and she'll have a good assessment of where different buildings are in that continuum, and then we'll be able to get you some feedback on what might make sense.
awesome. Yeah, definitely.
We had a thing around, Steve, you giving us a vision statement, I think, which we wanted to have covered CT. I don't know how it got under board governance and development, but I think it's, I don't know if that's gonna come out of the profile of the graduate board, I mean, that's.
I don't think it will, but I think that it fits well, because that was one of those things that there was a decision last spring to move that to the fall. I think that fits well with it, because I think that, I don't know, it's chicken or an egg. Do we go first with the vision and mission and then go through the Battelle process? Do we
Probably
do it the
vision
other way
mission for
around?
Battelle. That needs to fit into what we're
Do we
trying
do
to
it simultaneously? Right, so But there was a conversation about moving that to this fall, winter time period, so I think it fits well with that work.
And then I completely failed to progress anything around the good board governance awards, so my bad. It's the ISB better governance thing.
Even though you expressed Lori and Paul.
I think she's talking about the whole board, what would it take for us to achieve it as a
I
board?
think it's a matter of looking at their website and
It
seeing
is,
what
it's
options we
really,
can
it's really not that hard, I just haven't done it, so, I need to
And
do that.
Paul, when is that information due? I'm just curious.
It's only for the school year?
But what date?
So it's,
It's probably, we probably already missed it for,
would be for lunch.
For the last school year, and it doesn't go from like July to
September?
September to
Like the middle of September.
Yeah.
Okay, no.
middle of
So
September,
we're-
until when? All school year, or? Like when you have to do these things? that's-
Yeah,
Yeah, so. it
I'm not sure how far in
ends-
advance of the
this would
board
be
meeting
last
they cut it off, I don't know that.
year. You have to submit
I'm
by
in,
a certain date.
I will take that as an action, and some actually do it. Financial, let's see, decrease in negative loss and open enrollment, I think we have gotten better there. I mean, we said it before, and Pearl, we've got another topic on Pearl, in a few minutes. So so this was really helpful, to go through this, because I think it also starts framing some of the things that we might want to see as priorities for this coming year. There's a couple other things, though, if we can take just half a second, around additional things. So safety / threat assessment. I'm getting the feeling strongly that we need to have some more opportunity for community engagement on what we're doing on threat assessment. I know we've got this grant out there, there's some concerns about how it's been crafted and worded and how it's been not developed, or we haven't engaged our community effectively enough in what it is. And we're getting, as you all know, lots and lots of inputs from multiple sides and angles on this. I don't think we can stop a focus here. I think we need to be responsive and be responsive to our staff who are bringing concerns forward too, right? So I think my sense is we have to have this coming year some kind of goal around safety / threat assessment and what we want to try to find out, and then how we want to do that to be as effective as we can be.
Well, I think you're right about a public discussion.
Yeah, I think
Because I've been getting that from a lot of people, and also just a copy of the original application is, I think that's, should be made public.
Yeah.
What the district's intentions were with it. And because there's a lot of, with the lack of information, everyone's putting in their own. And it's not the authentic narrative, so we need to make sure that the public's informed and has an opportunity to weigh in, because, we have been out ahead.
Yeah, I'm thinking listening posts or going out to
Correct, yes,
events where we, plug in with them and talk about what we're trying to accomplish. I think there is some misinformation or misunderstanding. We just need to clarify. We need to have a dialogue. We need to craft this in a dialogue and not just kind of decree this is what we're gonna do. So, I think that needs to be an initiative this year, but others?
No, I agree, but we just have to ensure that we're holding those listening sessions
Yeah, yeah.
and the community posts in a manner that invites participation from all
That's what I'm saying.
aspects of our community.
we need
Because
to-
not everybody always feel comfortable and just come to the ESC, come talk to me.
Right.
And we have to be very intent on making sure we know what those spaces are and going there. And just be willing to perhaps make ourselves uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. So going out instead of making people come to us. Yeah, that's not working.
Well, we're a middleman, right? This group says, you tell those people that are feeling this way why they're wrong. And then they tell, well, you go tell those people why they're wrong. Right? That's not a discussion. That's just us relaying people's feelings, right? If people are gonna have a conversation, we need to make sure people are comfortable with having a conversation and they're welcome at the table and we can facilitate that conversation, but as just a sounding board that just rebounds what people are saying, like it's not good. It's not a conversation.
It's not a conversation right now. But then as we get these inputs though, we are going to, as a board, have to make some choices once we have the information. Because we're not gonna make everyone happy on this one.
No, and I'm willing to have that conversation as me personally, right? Saying, here's how I feel on this topic and that topic, right? But that's not what we've had up to this point, right? It's just, you know, I need you to tell me that you're doing exactly what I want. I don't care what anybody else over here wants, right? And that's, I could tell that one person how I feel about it. That's not, I don't think that's helpful.
It's not a dialogue.
I don't know what that format looks like. Cause it.
I don't know either.
Cause normally when we've done this kind of thing, we go out in the community, we have a message. We have like a pretty, with boundaries. We had our graphs and we said, this is why, it was our why.
Mm-hmm.
And so, right now, what feels to me is, so you could have that, and are you gonna have like a fist fight? Or like, it feels like there's really intense feelings
Both sides.
on both sides with very lack of understanding, right, where folks are coming from, and just a whole lot of misinformation, and yeah, just you do what I want because so I don't know what
So the message is we come with at least some clarity as to what the intent was with the grant and a threat assessment team, whatever that picture is, and that may be step one, and whatever future steps down the road are not codified yet, right? But sort of having this, here's a starting point that we're looking at in order to, address safety concerns, where that starting point is. And the conversation starts from that starting point, either walking back from it or moving forward from
I think that we
it.
have to have a point of view and sort of a sense of, okay, the board's heard all this, we believe status quo is not an option. And so therefore, we're proposing a threat assessment of cross-functional systems, and here's how we think it's configured, and here's why we want to do it, and blah, blah, blah. And we have to start with something, otherwise it's going to be, to your point, just that it won't be productive. But we're going to have a point of view, I think.
And like where I started from was, the first thing is this with the application, let's let the community see exactly what was the intent of the application.
But that application doesn't fully explain what the threat assessment team is.
Well, I understand, but at least it makes known to the community the district's intention when they apply for the grant. And we are a public school,
Well, I'm not arguing that point.
and the community has a right to that information.
I'm not arguing that point, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that grant does not define the whole
I-
threat assessment.
I understand.
That's my only point.
And that's part of the information, right? That's part of the information is that some of the information that is being discussed isn't in.
So, and I also think we need to have a discussion at a board meeting. I think we need a topic where we talk about this, around what our next steps are going to be, because it's been one-sided inputs to us, whether it's a community comment that we can't react to, respond to, emails that are coming in, people stopping you at the grocery store, I get that too. So I think we need to be intentional with the community about these are the next steps that we're going to take, and just put that out there. And I think it should be at a board meeting and not at a work session, and maybe we can add that to another thing.
Yeah, one of the things I got Kate working on too is I think there's just a lack of operational definitions out there, and I think that's caused all kinds of confusion. What's a school resource officer?
Yeah.
what's a threat assessment
Yeah.
officer? What's a threat
Yeah.
assessment coordinator?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a bunch of places where there's clearly multiple roles, where there's multitude of confusion right now. So I've got her working on some operational definitions for
I
that.
think that would be really helpful, and we can have a discussion at a board meeting where we talk about our point of view around a threat assessment, we get some definitions out there, and lay out a process for engaging the community going forward, to kind of reboot this activity in a way that we can start moving forward, because I feel sort of stuck on this.
That might be an opportunity, if Kate gets that done and she can present that,
Yeah.
and that could be our opportunity for that discussion.
Yeah.
Once we have these operational definitions, she shows us, this is what a threat assessment coordinator is, this would be a threat assessment officer, this is a school resource officer, and these are what it's not, and that would give us an opportunity to talk about that, and say.
We'll tie the grant into it, because that's really the funding source for that threat assessment coordinator. So make that connection right there to it, so people can see that it's really just a funding request.
Okay. And then the other thing that we didn't have on our agenda for last year, but it came up to us loud and clear, was climate action. And I feel compelled that we need to have a goal around continuing to pursue that. We have a resolution, we've got some dates, end of December.
End of December, you'll get the plan, actually December 10th, I want to say it is, you'll get the plan from UNI. So they adjusted their timeline to meet our board schedule.
Yeah.
So I had to share with the bad news with them that the second board meeting in December will not take place because it will be scheduled for December 24th, which is a holiday, so we won't be in here. So they backed all their dates out and will have it to us December 10th.
Okay, that's awesome. So, I mean, this was helpful because as we were talking, I was taking very light notes, but some of the things that I'm hearing that it sounds like we will want to be pursuing next year are MTSS and PBIS. We talked about PD, and, you know, whatever that design looks like. We talked a bit about our equity agenda around recruitment and retention of teachers of color, continuing to be a need of the district. We talked a lot about the profile of the graduate and that inclusive view of what that profile looks like across all sectors, not just college-bound students, but so there's a lot of good discussion there. We talked about FMP 2.0, but having it based in directions for the district, not just I want another music classroom. We talked about getting more information on the playground, what the next steps are there, board policies. We've got board development ideas. We've got the safety threat assessment and climate action next steps. So if we just roll forward the things that we just talked about in the last hour and a half of things that we want to continue to pursue, that's a lot. I will take this information and put it into another kind of little chart thingy like we had before, but then I think we're going to have another conversation around capacity, because this wall of paper has been, I think, for me, in trying to get close enough to my computer to read it online, that what had been posted is a reality of what we have going on already in the district. And some of these are probably discretionary things, and maybe there's some things in it that we could weed out. I'm positive lots of things in here that are not discretionary, that are absolutely necessary, or compliance oriented, and we just have to do them. And so the capacity question is a really big one, and we have to find a way to balance our priorities against what available time we have, or find ways to increase capacity by taking some stuff off the list. And again, that's a tough one.
Were there any, I guess, with this exercise that we did, were there any like slam dunks? Anything that stood out like, oh, okay.
There's things that stand out. So just for reference, so when you look at it, if you look over it behind you, and I'm going to spend no more than 2 minutes on this, that is the list of 240 self-identified initiatives from the administrative team at this building only. Did not reach out to the building level folks. I'm presuming we may uncover a few more if we do that. This is the first step in the process. Then it was, what are we doing now? That's on the left. What are the new things that are starting this year? That's right behind Janet. The bottom one is those things that didn't get started for a lack of resources of some type, money, people, something. Okay? Then I asked the owners of the initiatives to tell me whether it was critical or unimportant. There are 240 initiatives up there. 4 were listed as low priority. 180 are listed as critical. 180. Okay? Then I asked everybody, not just the owners, how do you prioritize them? All you gotta do is look at the colors. Anything that's red got no votes. Okay? Anything that's green got a bunch of votes. It's all conditionally formatted.
And is
What-
this the thing you sent us?
Mm-hmm.
Which, and I just want to give one caveat, there were so many acronyms in there,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but some of my responses personally,
Yeah.
I didn't know what you were talking about, so.
And
There were things that people in their departments did.
Yep.
Because they were so in the weeds, so that you're not alone, there were folks, and there were some people in the curriculum side.
And maybe that was the intention, I don't know.
Well,
but-
part of it was to make sure that people
But some of my
understood the
votes
breadth.
were
Yep.
like, I don't know what this is, so I'll choose that.
But what we did find was that there's no, you asked the question, JP, and I think that's the right question to ask. You can't look down any one of these columns, even special ed that had the lowest number of initiatives. You can't look down any one of these columns and find the one on the farthest left, which is the one that got the most hits, the most people cited it, and find any one of those columns that doesn't have at least one red box. So someone in that employment category, whether it was board, central office administrator, or building administrator, didn't even think it was in the top 6. And it was the number one most cited one by everybody overall. So what this really shows us is too many initiatives, not enough focus. So we internally are going to come back to you as we move through this year with the idea of what type of strategic refinement and narrowing needs to take place. Some of these things, like you said, they're compliance issues. We have some things on here that are compliance issues that got 0 votes. Why? Compliance not really attractive, right? You know, I gave Kristen a hard time. The communications one, the website compliance one got 0 votes. I said, did you not do the survey? Yeah. How come you didn't vote for that? Well, because that's not one of my top 6. Like, yeah, but it has to be done. Well, I understand that, but it's not one of my top 6. Okay. So we need to weed out the things that are compliance and just be able to share with you, these things have to be done. But then of the discretionary things, which of these discretionary things aren't making people's top 6, top 10, top 20?
Maybe weed it
And,
out.
and why are we doing them?
I was gonna say, is this our primary? And we can actually have the next vote with, you know, a third of the things that were on there?
Chase and I have just, we're brainstorming today about how we're going to work through this first. We're going to use a ripple effect. We're going to work through this with our central office team here, and then we're going to work through it with our admin council and all of our administrators, and give them an opportunity actually to help make sure that we're not missing things on the list. And then there's that concept of, and you and I were talking about it when we had our small group work, you know, his corporate parents, it's not the term he used, but the corporate parents have a concept of the critical few, right? And the critical few is you can do a few things really well, or you can do a whole bunch of things not so well. So we need to get to our critical few. And we talked about it today. Even if we could lop 100 off of here,
Still like that too many.
that's still too many. But conversely, the group said, oh my goodness, how could we possibly weed 100 out of this list? So on the one hand, we know it's too many if we only get 100 out. On the other hand, we look like climbing Mount Everest to try to get them out. We still have to try.
So, but back to the critical few, we go through these exercises with ACT all the time too. It's having the thematic focus areas, and or like this year, our moonshot is this.
Yeah.
And it's taken us a long time to get there, but we're finally getting that kind of focus, and I can firmly tell you, it makes everyone's lives a million
Well, then you
times
hold
better.
up what you're doing and you say, does that match this
Well,
one, or this one? And if
Yeah,
it doesn't,
Exactly,
Yep.
and it makes it really easy to say, I'm not spending one more iota of energy thinking about this one, boom, it's out because it's not aligned to the critical 3
right.
themes of
Is
the
it,
year.
is it aligned to that group that you just talked about there, right? You know, as the representatives of the community coming in here, you set these goals. Okay, so is what we're doing aligned to that? What we want to be able to do is come back a year from now, not have 240 of these, and be able to go down the list and have the top 6 clearly articulated from the board right down to the dean of students at each of the schools, and have everybody say, yep, that's the number 1, that's what we're working on. Not have some of these things that you just talked about that we know are super important showing up as red boxes on here. So that's all I want to say about it. I just wanted to make sure that you knew what we were doing, why we were doing it, where we want to go with it. This is your kind of first visual look at it. Recognize we're going to do this
So-
gallery walk exercise with our crew, and we'll be back to you.
So I'll take the, write up our little chart for 1920, what the things that I just kind of relayed, and we'll send it out to, we may want to know, I don't know, we may want to have that conversation, but at least it'll be a point that you can start use for your next pass on this.
Yeah, so when they're placed, are they placed in order on the ones at the top are the highest of the?
On there?
Yes.
No, they're actually alpha ordered on there because we haven't done, so if you look at the
Okay,
if you go to the third column over, apparently everything in that column is critical.
yeah.
There's a yellow one and a green one at the bottom. Everything else is red. So the red ones, they're just alpha ordered.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
we
same with
didn't
the
go,
yellow and the green.
yeah, we didn't go any further than that
And
to
the-
start
And the
with.
white ones are the ones that you're saying?
The white ones, no one gave me a number on it, so
Okay.
I'm not sure whether they're completely unimportant or they ought to be red. So
Okay.
that's our next step. Or it was an initiative that someone identified, because I asked people, I said, just simply identify initiatives that you know are going on. Then I said, go back in, and if you are the owner of the initiative, assign a number to it. So one of the hiccups in the process might be that we've identified initiatives for which no one thinks they're the owner.
Or do you have owners who have initiatives that they don't think are important?
Okay. That could also be another challenge. Keep in mind, we only had 4 blue squares, so there were only 4 people that were brave enough to say, that's something I'm in charge of and that's a low priority.
Okay, interesting.
So.
Okay. I mean, I think this is useful.
Yeah.
It's transparency. It's getting everything out so then you can more thoughtfully edit.
Did you identify, I'm sure, because even when I was going through, some of it was just, felt really redundant, and I'm like, well, if I voted for it over here, I'm not gonna vote for it over here, because that sounds like the same thing.
Yeah, and so one of the things we didn't want to go in and artificially start editing people's submissions. So this is raw.
Yeah.
And we also didn't do it by department. We did it by thematic area of work in the district. So we didn't say, this is the curriculum and instruction department, this is the business office. We looked at it more from a functional standpoint. So it's very raw, but I think I wanted you in on the front end. That's why I asked you to do the survey. I wanted you in on the front end just so you could see it and just really understand the magnitude and why sometimes when you say, hey, we got this great idea, let's do that, the people in the audience go, oh my God. Because they look at it and they try to think about it in these lists and say, yeah. So when you get that look, that's why you get this look, because they think that's what I'm trying to do now, and these are all the things you asked me to do this year, because that second batch is all the things that they perceive to be new starts this year. You know, realistically, we probably shouldn't have the 100 new starts that are on there. That's a bit of a challenge. So.
I know it's really bad when Steve texts me after board meetings or work sessions at 10 o'clock and I'm like, oh, it's really bad. Okay, this is useful. This was good. Thank you for going through that exercise and scoring and it's good.
Yep.
I'm gonna do this.
Yep.
That'll be input to you. You'll come back to us
Yep.
with a winner version. Are we comfortable moving to the next topic, which is Pearl, or do we want to talk more around goals?
I was trying to talk through, as we're going reflective on 2018, 19, my comments were more geared towards what I think 2019, 20 season chapter or improved on.
Yeah.
So I tried to cover that in there. I think that to the point of, do we have not a critical field? We have too many things on there. At the very least, once we get it kind of cleaned up, maybe, I don't know, a priority listing of it, right? At least saying, okay, of the 50 things we have, it's not 400, so we're doing pretty good.
Maybe we do this little ranking thing or scoring thing, like we
Something
did with
in
this
that
stuff.
regard.
That'll help us, because if your list, I mean, if you look at the number of items on your list, if there's a way for us to have an understanding that they're prioritized in this order, then when we go through and do our work, we make sure that the work we're doing is linked to the work you're doing and follows a similar set of priorities, because even your list has a lot of stuff on it, and we have scarce resources, and we need to make sure that we are putting those resources where you feel they'll have the greatest impact.
Although I think, when I look at our list, I mean, to me, my guess is you got it covered somewhere in here. Like,
Yeah.
I think the work's happening, it's just,
Yep.
We just don't have alignment on what's important.
Yeah.
well, yeah, and.
Alignment and prioritization.
Things take-
Because I'd hate to find something that you think is a 1, 2, or 3 on your list winding up being a green one or a blue one on our list, that somehow the message wasn't internalized on our end, that that's a board priority, and it needs to be moved up the list. So,
It's a focus
Mhm.
priority.
Yep.
Yeah.
The one thing I was thinking of, before we move on, was just rattling around in my head, and I'm not sure how we put it into a goal format, but we talked about it during the whole budgeting process, this spring, which is super fun.
Oh, yeah, I forgot all about that, yeah.
Working out in probably long-term plan, having looked at our finances at our last board meeting and seeing a 6-year climb out of a hole. Just a long-term plan of how we put the stuff back,
Mm.
right? All the stuff that got trimmed here and there, you know, at the elementary level, secondary level, teacher librarians were a big thing, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff there. And even going back to previous cuts years ago, like all of those things, we want to get back as well as putting new stuff in, right? We always want more, but as a priority thing, right? We know we're not going to be able to put it all back next year. It's not one bad year, right? We've got a big hole to climb out of. But at least trying to identify all of those little things that have either been restricted or just flat out cut or whatever, but this time around before, and saying, you know what, okay, priority number 1 is whatever, reducing class sizes at the elementary level, okay? That's what it will be, you know, and move on down the line, and then figuring out how we make those things happen on the fiscal side of things, because everything costs money. But I don't want the one really crappy year of having to do budget cuts then make us forget all of those things that we were trying to do or had done and now can't do. You know, like an ag class, right? That finances got in the way of getting stuff done. But we need to make sure we're not forgetting that those things exist. Right? They need to be put down somewhere in a list of, we're gonna get this back, and then this back, and then this back, and then this back, and then eventually the state's gonna give us a giant pile of cash, and we're gonna do everything and more and whatnot. And even if we don't have, you know, dates associated with those things, at least there's a priority of things we wanna try and do when we have the money to do it, whatever that list is. That would be the goal I would have. I don't know if it's kind of a board goal that kind of fits in here, but I think it's a task that we should take.
Well, that's great, but I mean, it's every 2 weeks, our fiscal auditing, and we decide every meeting what we're gonna do and what we're not gonna do. And I know Craig isn't here, but Craig would say, is it
84%.
84 cents out of every dollar is people cost. And, you know, the board, when we approve things, that affects where we're at. And so the qualifier, your comment was when the state gives us a big bundle of cash, we can hold our breath. But it's also important for us to be fiscally responsible all the time, and even in good times. So I think it's a great idea. But I think it's also important for us to be on top of things, from everything, from travel to even the smaller things.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that, but we're down, what, 30 teachers this year?
No,
Last
yeah,
year, right? Like, that's
right,
a
right.
huge number, right? And that's not gonna magically appear from trimming down here and there and everywhere, but.
No, I understand, because we're only dealing, you know, the other thing Craig would say is, okay, when I make that argument, he says, well, the 84 cents is where you really gotta concentrate,
So
because it's the bigger piece.
you know, that function, I think since this board made those cuts, I think before the election, that this board could set an intention, you know, set a priority list, I mean, for everybody who's here now. I mean, I think moving forward, then whatever happens in the election, there's at least, well, this is what the board who voted on those cuts, because that was our message to the community, that we would pay attention to that, and we would prioritize certain things, so I think if we can have input on that, obviously a new board and new majority can do different things, but I think it helps send the message like, hey, we did those budget cuts, and here were our ideas at the time of, so, you know, we're gonna rank librarians over orchestra or whatever. And I mean, that would be, you know, somebody who will still be here to have a document that says, you know, this was the intention of that board at that time. Right? Be a good guidance.
I added that to the list. So, anything else on goals? That was a really good conversation, appreciated that, and everyone's input was really great. Pearl. What do we want to do with Pearl?
If I heard you right last time, develop a new calendar, so I've got Leslie working on that right now. I asked him to develop a calendar, and then I realized I think I picked the wrong year. I said look at 22, I think you really want to look at 21, right? Yeah. So he's going to put together that same calendar that you had for 19 here, and give it to you for 21. 20. You want- 21.
And that's making the assumption that it would be on that ballot as opposed to a special election ballot.
Yeah, yeah, we were
So,
trying to do it on
I've
a
asked-
regular election ballot just for
I've
the
asked
cost.
a number of times, and I don't know that we've ever really had a discussion about the cost of a special election and whether that's something we want. We kind of touched on it, but I don't know that we've ever said 100% must be a general election.
Yeah, our auditor has said that he's given us several different numbers and finally said, how about not a number until we actually go through a combined election? And then he'll be able to give us a ballpark for what a special election would cost. So he was really struggling to try to figure it out. He's doing his best to try to make some estimates, but he gave me one estimate, and then I contacted him again. He gave me a different estimate. I said, wow, that's wildly different. He said, send me my first one back. Well, I think I forgot this, this, and this. So then he said, no, just scrap them both and
I just bring
talk to me in
that up
December.
because by the time the 2021 election comes through, you know, with some of the things we discussed tonight, you know, will there be a bond vote? Will there be what is it for the same?
Revenue purpose statement?
Yes, do we have to do another one of those? I
At
mean,
some
what
point,
else
yeah.
is on that ballot, is what I'm saying. And so I don't know what's on that ballot. And I think we should be intentional about it instead of just piling in a whole bunch of questions to the ballot and then the auditor really hates us.
And one thing we need to do anyway, for either an RPS or this, is what would we use it for? And to have a pretty,
Yeah.
That's right.
you know.
Yeah, we want to have a Pearl master plan that says this is what the money's for.
I think it will dovetail nicely with having some guidelines on inclusive playgrounds, because, I mean, the general name for it is playground tax, right? I mean, that's what people call it. And it's a pretty good use for that.
Yeah.
And so if there is direction there, I think that's an easier message. And that'll come fairly quickly, right? So
October, we're getting
We're
the,
hoping
So
that's
maybe-
good with the
For
emphasis
ourselves.
behind it to be a successful thing
so
sooner than 21.
how about we do this? You can have some of these calendars put together for 21. Leslie can just give us those dates, whatever. We need to get the playground committee's recommendations, and then we need to get cost information from the auditor after November 5th. Why don't, I mean, we can say we want to do Pearl discussion, but we're going to pick it up once we've got these two pieces of information that are going to help guiding us. Like, so after the new year is when we would start talking about what Pearl means to us. I'm just gonna put it on the list, but I'm trying to kind of time it and prioritize it.
One thing about the calendar that I think I'm viewing a little differently is I'm not so interested in exact dates. I think maybe what Leslie might be developing is what Craig developed for us, which said, if you're going to do this, by this date you have to do this, by this date you have to do this. And I'm more interested in like, what is our process and how long does that take and how much time do we need to allot for each section? So there's the section of how are we going to spend the money? How much time are we going to allot for that? Then there's the section of how are we going to sell it to the community? How much time do we allot for that? So it's the actual ballot question, all of that stuff, that's after we know what we're doing. I don't know how we get to that point.
Yeah, we were hoping to get
choosing.
those formal dates so that then we can back into the rest of the work. So we know if you need to, as a board, if you're looking at it and saying, okay, how do we mobilize the voters? We need this much time. How does that align to the formal calendar of when things have to be done? Okay, then if you're gonna start the mobilization here, then the education part has to happen where? And then, okay, the planning part has to start where? So that way we can back into that, but.
And I hear you, I've heard that multiple times, and I think I'm still looking for the, how much time do we need for each step? Not so much the actual date. Because a couple of times I've asked the same question and Craig's come back with actual dates and I'm like, that's nice, but that's only if we're doing it in that year, which we don't know yet.
And it also depends on our engagement. I mean, it depends on, are we gonna have someone in the community be the champion or kind of the campaign director, and how many folks are gonna help sell this thing out? It's, you know what I mean? I think for me, the duration of these steps depends on how many people we have engaged in pushing them forward. If we have a legion of people in the community going out there and winning over voters and knocking doors, then maybe it can go a lot faster. But.
Which all of that, I think, depends on what we're gonna do.
Exactly,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that, I think the first thing we do is what do we wanna do with it? And
Yeah.
that's how we can, who do we then talk to?
Yeah.
So once we get the inclusive stuff, I think we'll have a better idea of.
Yeah. So I'm gonna put
And
this,
that's one aspect of how the money would be spent. So, you know, I don't know.
It wouldn't be, I mean, Amy and I, sidebar over here, it wouldn't be bad to have an overall, I mean, like you guys talked about FMP 2.0, and so, you know, those different funding sources, I mean, having some kind of plan about what are all those gonna do together, otherwise, you know, that constant hit of that, I mean, you can take them as one-offs, but
yeah.
how do you group them together from Pearl to RPS to potentially a bond or whatever it is, but I don't know. Pearl doesn't seem, in my opinion, like it would be that hard to go get, but if it's poor timed with another one of those things, yeah, it could make it a bigger challenge.
That's what I'm saying.
All right, I'll add it to the list of,
And I just want to be clear, I'm not saying that this like needs to be our priority, because we've got clearly lots of priorities. So, and this is going to take some time, the Pearl, and so that's not my message.
I understand, but it's on the list, and we go through an exercise of prioritizing the stuff that we talked about tonight. I think it's worthy of being on the list for prioritization.
I'll be honest, I don't think this is it's $800,000. I don't think it's gonna be hard to figure out how we wanna spend $800,000. And I don't think it's gonna be hard to pass a Pearl. So it's not like go bond. So I think if it's something we can just deal with in a work session and have a list of playground replacement, wraparound care, I mean, we'll get to $800,000 super fast, right? So from replacing playgrounds to making them inclusive to wraparound services, I bet we get really quick that we get to that. And then we just need to decide as a board what is the priority. Because there's not a lot we can spend it on, so we're limited that way. And it's not a ton of money, or it gets spent really quickly, so I think we can have that conversation, you know, I don't think it'll take months to have the conversation. And then we can see who's gonna champion it and all that stuff. Because it's not a go bond live, you know, it's just
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, and I do want to just, again, acknowledge what Matt said to us that night we were discussing it, is that we don't have a lot of revenue sources. And so we've got something up there that you could be utilizing.
Right.
Okay, it's on the list. Anything else for the good of the cause tonight? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Aye.